Well, you can imagine my surprise and consternation when I heard the news this week that shocked America. You were probably equally surprised when you heard it. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar are rumored to be splitting up. Our world is crumbling around us. You see my temptation, right? In reality, I want to avoid talking about last week, Tuesday's events. I, like you, am afraid to talk about the election in public or even in private unless I know exactly who I'm with and where they are. And I'm facing a consistory tomorrow night in which my contract is up for discussion. So, how about them Cubs? I knew that this was going to be a problem, and I learned the extent of it on Wednesday. We had our regularly scheduled lunch with a pastor's group that I'm a part of, and there are four of us. There's a Methodist, an Episcopalian, a Lutheran, and me. And the four of us have become friends. We've been meeting several years. And being preachers, we can normally talk over each other's sentences for an hour, and none of us will understand what anybody else said, but we'll have had a good time. But on this Wednesday, I walked up to the group as we waited to be seated, and I tried to break what was obvious ice, and I said something like, "Boy, what an amazing day, huh?" And the only response was, "Yeah, that weather is something else." And this isn't, of course, a problem just with preachers. I understand that even hairdressers are afraid to talk about the election, and they'll talk about anything. So, the point today is this. We need to find a way to talk to each other. If we are what we say we are, a community, a family, then we need to learn how to talk to each other with words of love and in ways that engender trust. Everyone is afraid to talk about the biggest revolution in our lifetime. We need to be able to talk. So here's what I would like to think about today for the next few minutes. Three things. First, your first priority and loyalty is always to Jesus Christ and his church. That's the mission. That's the continuing mission of all of God's children. That's your mission. Second, God is in control. You don't need to be terrified about what's coming. In fact, what may be coming is an opportunity to witness in a whole new way, in new spectacular ways. And third, you as citizens need to be involved. Regardless of how you voted, now we're all on the same side of Tuesday, and we all need to be involved. If you desire change, if you're not happy with what happened, if you desire new change, then you have to have the courage to take control and get involved in agencies of peaceful change. If you like the outcome, if you are celebrating the outcome of the election, then don't live in fear of the opposition, nor denigrate them, but try to win them over by acting with courage and wisdom and love. Let's understand that people are allowed to disagree with us and still be family and friends. Well, thankfully, Jesus knew there would be weeks like this, and he helped us prepare for it. So let me give you a little background. The seat of religious and political power in Israel during Jesus' day in Jerusalem was the temple. So, as we look at the temple, it's this huge sparkling monument, right? I mean, it is a monstrous place, and it is beautiful beyond compare. And so the disciples, who are mostly rural guys, a lot of them fishermen, they were sitting around it, marveling at the beauty of it. And so they are saying, in essence, to Jesus, look at this beautiful monument that people have given as a gift to God. They're talking about what a great place it is. And so Jesus, being the kind of person he is, always speaking the truth, says, well, as for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. You see? That whole thing, Jesus is saying, is going to come crumbling down to the ground. So the disciples are, of course, thrown by this. I mean, this is the equivalent, if you imagine Jesus as a tour guide in Washington, D.C., and he shows you the White House, and he shows you the Washington Monument, and he says, well, yeah, and everybody says, oh, man, these are amazing things. Look at that beautiful stone and all of that. And Jesus says, well, as for what you see here, one day it's all going to be burned to the ground. Well, you would think that must mean the world's coming to an end if that's going to happen. And that's exactly what the disciples thought. They thought, if this is going to happen, that must mean the world is coming to an end. So Jesus, tell us, when will we know? How will we know when this horrible, horrible thing is going to happen? When the unthinkable is going to happen? Give us some signs. So Jesus now starts talking about what is probably one of the most misunderstood passages in the Bible. You see, people read this passage and what comes after it, and they think, oh, well, these are the signs. You can buy books that tell you all about this. But what Jesus says, look, these are not signs about the end of the world. That's wrong. That is a misinterpretation of prophecy. Watch out that you are not deceived. Go ahead and read the books if you want. They're entertaining. But it's not gospel, okay? For many will come in my name and say, I am he. The time is near. Jesus says, do not follow them. You see, what we're reading here, the signs we see in the Bible, the signs that we see around us, are not signs that the world is coming to an end. Okay? God is in control. There's one sign that the world is ending. When you look up one day, if it happens during our lifetime, and you see Jesus coming out of the clouds, then you know that's the sign. It's over. And it's beginning. And if it doesn't happen in our lifetime, you'll be coming with Jesus on the clouds. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Here we come. Live forever in the new earth, new heaven. But until then, don't follow these false prophets. When you hear of wars and uprisings, don't be frightened. The word that is really written there is better translated. I agree with the translations that translate it as terrified. Don't be terrified when terrible things happen in your world. When your worldview is crushed, as has happened to some of you, don't be terrified. These monuments in our minds, these monuments of how the world should look, are going to come crumbling down sometimes. That happens. It happens that stone falls upon stones, that monsters come up, that monsters get blown up. It happens sometimes. But the world isn't coming to an end yet. These things must happen. That's what Jesus says. Jesus says these things must happen. But the end is not going to come right away. And that word must, that is in our Bible, that these things must happen, is what the whole doctrine of the providence of God comes from. That these things must happen. In other words, Jesus is saying these things must happen because God has ordained them to happen. They cannot not happen because they are, as all things are, in the providence of God. Nothing happens without God's knowledge. Does God make everything happen? No. Does everything happen, though, under the ordained providential knowledge of God? Of course. Read those things this afternoon. They give you a perfect understanding of this doctrine of providence. But these things must happen. You know, there are all sorts of things Jesus says in life that can frighten us. Wars, right? There were wars in Jesus' day. Martin Luther, writing about this passage 500 years ago, says, the wars today are about as bad as you can imagine. Look what we've done with munitions and so forth. Well, of course, now 500 years later, we would say, how could it get any worse, right? How could we destroy anybody any more than we have? Car bombs and all of that, right? Wars have been, are, and will until Jesus comes. It doesn't mean the world is coming to an end. Earthquakes happen all over the place for centuries, all the time. It's not a sign the end is coming. Famines happen around the world, always, will continue to happen. It's not a sign the world is coming to an end. Fearful events Even presidential elections that half of you, and I think our congregation is probably pretty representative of the voting population of the United States. I would say that probably, half of us here feel it's a bad thing, and half of us feel it's a wonderful thing. To those of you for whom this is a fearful event, don't worry, okay? Instead, take action. Jesus told you things like this would happen. And to those of you who think this is a wonderful thing, don't worry. The people who are opposed to you aren't the devil incarnate. Instead, we need to try, those who are the victors need to now try to bring alongside by understanding why the opposition is there, by coming along to see where we are. Here's the thing. Talk about fearful events. This is prophesied by Jesus in somewhere around the year 30. That's about the year Jesus died. 35 or so years, or 40 years later, in the year 70, the temple was finally finished in the mid-60s. The real 60s, not 1960s, in the 60s. And then in the year 70, that whole temple was really destroyed. Brick by brick, stone by stone, done, burned up, gone forever. 1 million Jews lost their lives. 1 million Jews lost their lives. And that's when Jesus says to these disciples, who were alive to see it, because these were young men when Jesus told them, they are alive to see this. And so Jesus is saying, when you see these things, don't think that's the end. Because first this has to happen. People are going to seize and persecute you. You're going to be betrayed by family and friends. Look, I know this. I know that some of you feel like you've been betrayed by family and friends. I get that. I know that within families there are people who cannot talk about how each of you voted in this election. Maybe even spouses. You see, this is the work of Satan, to divide us. It's not that we're Satan. It's that Satan is using the things, the fearful events in life that cause us to be betrayed by family and friends. That's what we as a church need to avoid. Jesus is telling them, look, you'll be put to death. Everyone will hate you. Now, maybe I should have preached about something else that would make you feel better. Your life is going to be great. Everything's going to be wonderful. Keep coming to church. But this is the truth. This is what Jesus says we as a church need to be ready to do. So what does that mean in our context today? What it means in our context today is this. You will bear testimony to me. Those of you who are not happy with what happened Tuesday, you will have a time to feel depressed. But then you need to start taking action. Bear testimony to what Jesus says in his gospel. Those of you who are happy with what happened Tuesday, you will have a time to be happy. You won. But now will come the point where you bear testimony to Jesus. And what should the voice of the church be? There are Christians who voted for both of the two candidates. How can that be, right? Well, because each have different views of how their faith is expressed in politics. But what we know is in the Bible is this, that we as a church, when we see racism happen in our nation, both sides need to cry out against racism. That is clear gospel. And if I'm hated because of it, Jesus told me it would happen. I'm not afraid. There should not be violence in our nation as a result. And the church should speak out against the violence. And if people hate me for saying that, it's okay. Jesus told me that would happen. You see, that's what Jesus means. Bear testimony to the truth. Continue to speak up for the poor. Continue to speak up for the homeless. I believe that if the church is the voice to the next President Trump, that we can bring about change in him and bring about change I mean, you will see, if you watch 60 Minutes tonight, you'll see how he's already been changed. Already been changed to an awareness of the people. And I believe God is at work in his heart. And I believe if the church continues to speak with love, that we will see change. So be courageous. Don't be a fatalist. God is in control. But what these papers, what those words are telling you in the paper we handed out, is not that it's not like, oh well, it is what it is. Don't ever say that as a Christian. It's not it is what it is. It is what God calls us to make it as a church. God is in control, but he gives us hands and feet and voices to make a difference. God is working through people like us. The purpose is to be willing to carry on as the voices and the hands and the feet of Jesus, even when it seems like the stones are falling down all around us. To pick up the stones, put them back together. Don't be terrified. Keep speaking with courage. A great theologian, Martin Bucer, wrote this, a Reformed theologian. Nothing in the whole of the world can be safe. This is 500 years ago too. Nothing in the whole of the world can be safe, sure, and certain for those who preach and set forth what's in the gospel. In this case, they can hardly trust their own brothers and sisters, or children, or even their parents. Therefore, it is in Satan's hand to stir and truly set all people against each other. You see what he's saying? You preach the gospel. You preach the good news to the world. And Satan is going to stir up even your own family, even your own friends against you. That's the work of Satan. So the call of the church is to fight against the temptation of Satan, to be against each other, and instead to be for each other, to get rid of the words and the actions that divide families and especially the church. And for your own good. I mean, what are you going to talk about at Thanksgiving, right? How can you not talk about this? Learn how to talk about it as a family. Let's learn as a church to talk about it as a family. Because of this. But in all of that depressing talk that Jesus gave, he ends with this great word of hope. Not a hair of your head will perish. Yes, you're going to be picked on for your views. Whether you say, I'm a supporter of President Trump, and I think he is the change we need, and I'm all for his change, and I hope that he changes Washington and changes this nation. People are going to be mad at you for saying that, right? But not a hair of your head will perish. If that's the gospel to you, if that's what Jesus is saying to you about what happened, then say it. But say it with love. Say it in a way that desires to not ostracize people or make them feel bad, but say it with love. Try to understand why people disagree with that. If you're a person who's opposed to that, I voted against, or I voted for Mrs. Clinton, I voted against Trump, however you want to put it, and then explain why you did. And listen to what that person says, and listen to what the other person says, because we need to learn to talk to each other and understand each other. When we can understand where we're coming from, here's the best example I can give you. I have a guy in my office, in my law office, who's a Chicago Bears fan. He goes to Packers games wearing a Bears uniform. Now, I thought he was crazy, but I asked him why, and he told me because he grew up, his dad was a Bears fan, and his family from Chicago, and so forth and so on. Once you understand why, I still think he's crazy for wearing a Bears uniform to a Packers game, but I understand it. I'm not mad at him. I don't think it's like the devil incarnate. And if we can understand where each other is coming from, then we can be together. We don't all have to agree. We're never all going to agree. God brought us together knowing we're not going to agree. But if we can come together and find a common voice that speaks the gospel to the world, we know that not a hair will perish from our head without it being the providence of God. I know that for many of you, it seems like the temple has been destroyed. The world's falling apart. But let me tell you this. God was not surprised. God has got this. For those of you who are joyful at the Trump revolution, let me assure you that God was not surprised. God has got this. And God is going to bring the change. Let's not be afraid to talk about the new reality. Let's recognize that what we do not because we're terrified about tomorrow, but because we want to act to bring change for tomorrow. Let's recognize that as a church, we need to talk to each other so we can preach with one voice to the world that God is in control. Because if we are not terrified, if we speak with one voice, then we will stand firm. What you believe in, stand firm in. And then we will win life. And that is a victory we all can pursue with courage and receive joy. Because in Christ, we are all victors. We all win when our mission is to preach the good news